Brought to you by WikiVidi.com. The Sound of Music film. The Sound of Music is a 1965 American musical drama film produced and directed by Robert Wise, and starring Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer, with Richard Haydn and Eleanor Parker. The film is an adaptation of the 1959 Broadway musical of the same name, composed by Richard Rodgers with lyrics by Oscar Hammerstein II. The film's screenplay was written by Ernest Lehman, adapted from the stage musicals book by Lindsay and Crouse, based on the memoir The Story of the Trapp Family Singers by Maria von Trapp. The film is about a young Austrian woman studying to become a nun in Salzburg in 1938 who is sent to the villa of a retired naval officer and widower to be governess to his 7 children. After bringing and teaching love and music into the lives of the family through kindness and patience, she marries the officer, and together with the children they find a way to survive the loss of their homeland through courage and faith. The film was released on March 2, 1965 in the United States, initially as a limited roadshow theatrical release. Although critical response to the film was widely mixed, the film was a major commercial success, becoming the #1 box office movie after 4 weeks and the highest-grossing film of 1965. By November 1966, The Sound of Music had become the highest-grossing film of all time, surpassing Gone with the Wind, and held that distinction for 5 years. The film was just as popular throughout the world, breaking previous box office records in 29 countries. Following an initial theatrical release that lasted 4.5 years, and 2 successful re-releases, the film sold 283 million admissions worldwide, and earned a total worldwide gross of $286 million. The Sound of Music received 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. The film also received 2 Golden Globe Awards for Best Motion Picture and Best Actress, the Directors Guild of America Award for Outstanding Directorial Achievement, and the Writers Guild of America Award for Best Written American Musical. In 1998, the American Film Institute listed The Sound of Music as the 55th greatest American movie of all time and the 4th greatest movie musical. In 2001, the United States Library of Congress selected the film for preservation in the National Film Registry, finding it culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Plot: Maria is a free-spirited young Austrian woman studying to become a nun at Nonnberg Abbey in Salzburg in 1938. Her love of music and the mountains, her youthful enthusiasm and imagination, and her lack of discipline caused some concern among the nuns. The mother abbess, believing Maria would be happier outside the abbey, sends her to the villa of retired naval officer Captain Georg von Trapp to be governess to his 7 children, Liesel, Friedrich, Louisa, Kurt, Brigitte, Martha and Gretel. The captain has been raising his children alone using strict military discipline following the death of his first wife. Although the children misbehave at first, Maria responds with kindness and patience, and soon the children come to trust and respect her. While the captain is away in Vienna, Maria makes play clothes for the children and takes them around Salzburg and the surrounding mountains, and she teaches them how to sing. When the captain returns to the villa with Baroness Elsa Schrader, a wealthy socialite, and their mutual friend Max Detweiler, they are greeted by Maria and the children returning from a boat ride on the lake that concludes when their boat overturns. Displeased by his children's clothes and activities and Maria's impassioned appeal that he get closer to his children, the captain orders her to return to the abbey. Just then he hears singing coming from and outside the house and is astonished to see his children singing for the Baroness. Filled with emotion, the captain joins his children singing for the first time in years. Afterwards, he apologizes to Maria and asks her to stay. Impressed by the children's singing, Max proposes he enter them in the upcoming Salzburg festival. But the suggestion is immediately rejected by the captain as he does not allow his children to sing in public. He does agree, however, to organize a grand party at the villa. The night of the party, while guests in formal attire waltz in the ballroom, Maria and the children look on from the garden terrace. When the captain notices Maria teaching Kurt the traditional Landler folk dance, he cuts in and partners with Maria in a graceful performance culminating in a close embrace. Confused about her feelings, Maria blushes and breaks away. Later, the Baroness, who noticed the captain's attraction to Maria, hides her jealousy while convincing Maria that she must return to the abbey. Back at the abbey, when Mother Abbess learns that Maria has stayed in seclusion to avoid her feelings for the captain, she encourages her to return to the villa to look for her life. After Maria returns to the villa, she learns about the captain's engagement to the Baroness and agrees to stay until they find a replacement governess. The captain's feelings for Maria, however, have not changed, and after breaking off his engagement, the captain marries Maria. While they are on the honeymoon, Max enters the children in the Salzburg festival against their father's wishes. When they learn that Austria has been annexed by the Third Reich and the Anschluss, the couple return to their home, where a telegram awaits informing the captain that he must report to the German naval base at Bremerhaven to accept a commission in the German Navy. Strongly opposed to the Nazis in the Anschluss, the captain tells his family they must leave Austria immediately. That night, as the von Trapp family attempt to leave, they are stopped by a group of brown shirts waiting outside the villa. When questioned by Gauleiter Hans Zeller, the captain maintains they are headed to the Salzburg festival to perform. Zeller insists on escorting them to the festival, after which his men will accompany the captain to Bremerhaven. Later that night at the festival, during their final number, the von Trapp family slip away and seek shelter at the nearby abbey, where Mother Abbess hides them in the cemetery crypt. Brown shirts soon arrive and search the abbey, but the family is able to escape using the caretaker's car. When the soldiers attempt to pursue, they discover their cars will not start as two nuns have removed parts of the engines. The next morning, after driving to the Swiss border, the von Trapp family make their way on foot across the frontier into Switzerland to safety and freedom. Background: The Sound of Music story is based on Maria von Trapp's memoir, The Story of the Trapp Family Singers, published in 1949, to help promote her family's singing group following the death of her husband Georg in 1947. Hollywood producers expressed interest in purchasing the title only, but Maria refused, wanting her entire story to be told. In 1956, German producer Wolfgang Liebeniner purchased the film rights for $9,000, hired George Herdeleck and Herbert Rienecker to write the screenplay, and Franz Groth to supervise the soundtrack, which consisted of traditional Austrian folk songs. The Trapp Family was released in West Germany on October 9, 1956, and became a major success. 2 years later, Liebeniner directed a sequel, The Trapp Family in America, and the two pictures became the most successful films in West Germany during the post-war years. Their popularity extended throughout Europe and South America. In 1956, Paramount Pictures purchased the United States film rights, intending to produce an English-language version with Audrey Hepburn as Maria. The studio eventually dropped its option but one of its directors, Vincent J. Donahue, proposed the story as a stage musical for Mary Martin. Producers Richard Halliday and Leland Haywood secured the rights and hired playwrights Howard Lindsay and Russell Crouse, who had won the Pulitzer Prize for State of the Union. They approached Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II to compose one song for the musical. But the composers felt the two styles, traditional Austrian folk songs and their composition, would not work together. They offered to write a complete new score for the entire production if the producers were willing to wait while they completed work on Flower Drum Song. The producers quickly responded that they would wait as long as necessary. The Sound of Music stage musical opened on November 16, 1959, at the Lunt-Fontanne Theatre in New York City and ran on Broadway for 1,443 performances, winning 6 Tony Awards including Best Musical. In June 1960, 20th Century Fox purchased the film adaptation rights to the stage musical for $1.25 million against 10% of the gross. Production. For the film, Richard Rodgers added 2 new songs, I Have Confidence and Something Good, for which he wrote the lyrics as well as the music, while 3 of the original stage songs were omitted: How Can Love Survive, No Way to Stop It, and An Ordinary Couple. Arranger and conductor Erwin Kostel pre-recorded the songs with a large orchestra and singers on a stage prior to the start of filming, and later adapted instrumental underscore passages based on the songs. Choreographers Mark Brough and D.D. Wood, who had worked with Andrews on Mary Poppins, worked out all new choreography sequences that incorporated many of the Salzburg locations and settings. The Sound of Music was filmed from March 26 through September 1, 1964, with external scenes shot on location in Salzburg, Austria and the surrounding region, and interior scenes filmed at the 20th Century Fox Studios in California. The movie was photographed in 70mm Todau by Ted McCord and produced with deluxe color processing and 6-track sound recording. Screenplay and pre-production. In December 1962, 20th Century Fox president Richard D. Zanuck hired Ernest Lehman to write the screenplay for the film adaptation of the stage musical. Lehman reviewed the original script for the stage musical, rearranged the sequence of songs, and began transforming a work designed for the stage into a film that could use the camera to emphasize action and mood and open the story up to the beautiful locations of Salzburg and the Austrian Alps. The Do-Re-Mi sequence in the play, for example, was originally a stagnant number. Lehman transformed it into a lively montage showing some of the beautiful sights of Salzburg, as well as showing Maria and the children growing closer over time. Lehman also eliminated 2 songs, How Can Love Survive and No Way to Stop It, sung by the characters of Elsa and Max. In January 1963, he saw the Fox English dubbed version of the 2 German films, was not especially impressed, and decided to use the stage musical and Maria's memoir for most of his source material. While Lehman was developing the screenplay, he and Zanuck began looking for a director. Their first choice was Robert Wise, with whom Lehman had worked on the film adaptation of West Side Story. But Wise was busy preparing work for another film, The Sand Pebbles. Other directors were approached and turned down the offer, including Stanley Donen, Vincent J. Donahue, George Roy Hill and Gene Kelly. In January 1963, Lehman invited one of his favorite directors, William Wyler, to travel to New York City with him to see the Broadway musical. After seeing the show, Wyler said he hated it. But after 2 weeks of Lehman's persuasion, Wyler reluctantly agreed to direct and produce the film. After hiring musical supervisor Roger Edens, Weiler, Lehman and Edens traveled to Salzburg to scout filming locations. In 2 weeks they managed to see approximately 75 locations, an experience that helped Lehman conceptualize several important sequences. During the trip, Lehman began to have reservations about Weiler's commitment to the project and communicated this to Zanuck, who instructed the writer to finalize the first draft of the screenplay as quickly as possible. Lehman completed the first draft on September 10, 1963 and sent it to Weiler, who had no suggestions or changes. At that time, Lehman also secretly gave a copy of the script to the agent of Robert Wise, whom Lehman still wanted as the director. Later that month, Weiler's agent approached Zanuck asking that production on the film be delayed so Weiler could direct The Collector. Zanuck told him to tell Weiler to make the other film, and that they would move ahead on schedule with another director, ending Weiler's participation. Meanwhile, Wise, whose film The Sand Pebbles had been postponed, read Lehman's first draft, was impressed by what he read and agreed to direct the film. Wise joined the picture in October 1963 and flew to Salzburg with associate producer Sol Chaplin and members of his production team to scout filming locations, including many that Weiler had identified. When he returned, Wise began working on the script. Wise shared Lehman's vision of the film being centered on the music, and the changes he made were consistent with the writer's approach, mainly reducing the amount of sweetness and sentimentality found in the stage musical. He had reservations about Lehman's opening aerial sequence, because they'd used a similar opening in West Side Story but decided to keep it. Other changes included replacing an ordinary couple with a more romantic number and a new song. For Maria's departure from the Abbey, Rodgers provided something good and I have confidence. Especially for the film, Lehman completed the second draft on December 20, 1963, but additional changes would be made based on input from Maria von Trapp and Christopher Plummer about the character of the captain. Plummer especially helped transform a character lacking substance into a stronger, more forceful, complex figure with a wry sense of humor and a darker edge. Lehman completed his final draft on March 20, 1964. Casting and rehearsals. Lehman's first and only choice for Maria was Julie Andrews. When Wise joined the project, he made a list of his choices for the role, which included Andrews as his first choice, Grace Kelly, and Shirley Jones. Wise and Lehman went to Disney Studios to view footage from Mary Poppins, which was not yet released. A few minutes into the film, Wise told Lehman, "Let's go sign this girl before somebody else sees this film and grabs her." Andrews had some reservations, mainly about the amount of sweetness in the theatrical version, but when she learned that her concerns were shared by Wise and Lehman and what their vision was, she signed a contract with Fox to star in The Sound of Music and one other film for $225,000. Wise had a more difficult time casting the role of the captain. A number of actors were considered for the part, including Bing Crosby, Yul Brynner, Sean Connery and Richard Burton. Wise had seen Christopher Plummer on Broadway and wanted him for the role, but the stage actor turned down the offer several times. Wise flew to London to meet with Plummer and explained his concept of the film. The actor accepted after being assured that he could work with Lehman to improve the character. Plummer later described himself as having become quite arrogant at the time, spoiled by too many great theatre roles. Wise also spent considerable time and effort on casting the secondary characters. For the role of Max Detweiler, Wise initially considered Victor Borge, Noel Coward, and Hal Holbrook among others before deciding on Richard Haydn. For the character of Baroness Elsa Schrader, Wise looked for a name. Actress Andrews and Plummer were not yet widely known to film audiences, and decided on Eleanor Parker. The casting of the children characters began in November 1963 and involved over 200 interviews and auditions throughout the United States and England. Some of the child actors interviewed attested who were not selected included Mia Farrow, Patty Duke, Leslie Ann Warren, Geraldine Chaplin, Shelley Fabares, Terry Garr, Kurt Russell, and the Osmonds. Most of the actors selected had some acting, singing, or dancing experience. Charmian Carr, however, was a model who worked part-time in a doctor's office and had no ambition to pursue a career as an actress. After a friend sent her photo to Wise's office, she was asked to interview. Wise later recalled, "She was so pretty and had such poise and charm that we liked her immediately." The last person to be cast was Daniel Truhitt in the role of Rolf. Rehearsals for the singing and dance sequences began on February 10, 1964. The husband and wife team of Mark Brough and Dee Dee Wood, who had worked with Andrews on Mary Poppins, worked out the choreography. With Saul Chaplin on piano, the arrangements could not be altered under Rodgers and Hammerstein's contract. The stage choreography was not used because it was too restrictive. Brough and Wood worked out all new choreography better suited for film that incorporated many of the Salzburg locations and settings. They even choreographed the newly added puppet dance sequence for the Lonely Goat Herd. The choreography for the Landler strictly followed the traditional Austrian folk dance. The musical arranger Erwin Kostel pre-recorded the songs with a large orchestra and singers on a stage prior to the start of filming. Kostel used 7 children and 5 adults to record the children's voices. The only scene where the child actors actually sing is when they sing The Sound of Music on their own after Maria leaves. The voices of some of the adult actors also had voice doubles, including Peggy Wood and Christopher Plummer. Filming and post-production. Principal photography began on March 26, 1964 at 20th Century Fox Studios in Los Angeles, where scenes from Maria's bedroom and the Abbey cloister and graveyard were filmed. The company then flew to Salzburg, where filming resumed on April 23 at Monte Abbey for the wedding scenes. From April 25 through May 22, scenes were filmed at the Felsenry at Tulle, Nürnberg Abbey, Mirabel Palace Gardens, Residence Fountain, and various street locations throughout the Altstadt area of the city. Wise faced opposition from city leaders who opposed him staging scenes with swastika banners. They relented after he threatened instead to include actual newsreel footage of crowds cheering Hitler during a visit to the town. On days when it rained, a constant challenge for the company, Wise arranged for scenes to be shot at St. Margarethen Chapel and Dura Studios. From May 23 to June 7, the company worked at Schloss Leopoldskron and an adjacent property called Bertelsmann for scenes representing the lakeside terrace and gardens of the Von Trapp villa. From June 9 to 19, scenes were shot at Frauenburg Palace, which represented the front and back facades of the villa. The Doremi picnic scene in the mountains was filmed above the town of Werfen in the Salzach River Valley on June 25 and 27. The opening sequence of Maria on her mountain was filmed from June 28 to July 2 at Mailweg Mountain near the town of Marktschellenberg in Bavaria. The final scene of the Von Trapp family escaping over the mountains was filmed on the Obersalzberg in the Bavarian Alps. The cast and crew flew back to Los Angeles and resumed filming at Fox Studios on July 6 for all remaining scenes, including those in the villa dining room, ballroom, terrace, living room, and gazebo. Following the last two scenes shot in the gazebo, for the songs Something Good and You Were 16, principal photography concluded on September 1, 1964. A total of 83 scenes were filmed in just over 5 months. Post-production work began on August 25 with 3 weeks of dialogue dubbing to correct lines that were ruined by various street noises and rain. In October, Christopher Plummer's singing voice was dubbed by veteran Disney playback singer Bill Lee. The film was then edited by Wise and film editor William Reynolds. Once the film was edited, Irwin Kostal, who orchestrated the musical numbers, underscored the film with background music consisting of variations on Rodgers and Hammerstein's original songs to amplify or add nuances to the visual images. When dubbing, editing, and scoring were complete, Wise arranged for 2 sneak preview showings, the first one held in Minneapolis on Friday, January 15, 1965, at the Mann Theater, and the second one held the following night in Tulsa. Despite the sensational responses from the preview audiences, Wise made a few final editing changes before completing the film. According to the original print information for the film, the running time for the theatrical release version was 174 minutes. The film was eventually given a G rating by the Motion Picture Association of America. The Sound of Music was filmed in 70mm Todau by Ted McCord and produced with deluxe color processing. Aerial footage was photographed with an MCS 70 camera. The sound was recorded on 70mm 6-track using a Westrex recording system. The sets used for the film were based on the storyboards of sketch artist Maurice Zuberano, who accompanied Wise to Austria to scout filming locations in November 1963. Wise met with the artist over a 10-week period and explained his objective for each scene, the feeling he wanted to convey and the visual images he wanted to use. When Zuberano was finished, he provided Wise with a complete set of storyboards that illustrated each scene and set storyboards the director used as guidance during filming. Zuberano's storyboards and location photos were also used by art director Boris Levin to design and construct all of the original interior sets at Fox Studios, as well as some external sets in Salzburg. The Von Trapp Villa, for example, was actually filmed in several locations. The front and back facades of the villa were filmed at Frauenburg Palace. The lakeside terrace and gardens were a set constructed on a property adjacent to Schloss Leopoldskron called Bertelsmann, and the interior was a constructed set at Fox Studios. The gazebo scenes for Something Good and 16 Going on 17 were filmed on a larger reconstructed set at Fox Studios, while some shots of the original gazebo were filmed on the grounds at Schloss Leopoldskron in Salzburg. Marketing. Robert Wise hired Mike Kaplan to direct the publicity campaign for the film. After reading the script, Kaplan decided on the ad line "The Happiest Sound in All the World," which would appear on promotional material and artwork. Kaplan also brought in outside agencies to work with the studio's advertising department to develop the promotional artwork, eventually selecting a painting by Howard Turpning of Andrews on an alpine meadow, with her carpet bag and guitar case in hand, with the children and Plummer in the background. In February 1964, Kaplan began placing ads in the trade papers Daily Variety, Weekly Variety, and The Hollywood Reporter to attract future exhibitor interest in the project. The studio intended the film to have an initial roadshow theatrical release in select large cities in theaters that could accommodate the 70mm screenings and 6-track stereophonic sound. The roadshow concept involved 2 showings a day with reserved seating and an intermission similar to Broadway musicals. Kaplan identified 40 key cities that would likely be included in the roadshow release, and developed a promotional strategy targeting the major newspapers of those cities. During the Salzburg production phase, 20th Century Fox organized press junkets for America journalists to interview Wise and his team and the cast members. Critical response. The film had its opening premiere on March 2, 1965 at the Rivoli Theatre in New York City. Initial reviews were mixed. Bosley Crowther in the New York Times criticized the film's romantic nonsense and sentiment, the children's artificial roles, and Robert Wise's cozy-cum-corny direction. Judith Crist, in a biting review in the New York Herald Tribune, dismissed the movie as icky, sticky, and designed for the 5 to 7 set and their mommies. In her review for McCall's magazine, Pauline Kael called the film the sugar-coated lie people seem to want to eat, and that audiences have turned into emotional and aesthetic imbeciles when we hear ourselves humming the sickly goody-goody songs. Wise later recalled, the East Coast intellectual papers and magazines destroyed us, but the local papers and the trades gave us great reviews. Indeed, reviewers such as Philip K. Scheuer of the Los Angeles Times described the film as 3 hours of visual and vocal brilliance, and Daily Variety called it a warmly pulsating, captivating drama set to the most imaginative use of the lilting RH tunes, magnificently mounted and with a brilliant cast. The wildly mixed film reviews reflected the critical response to the stage musical. According to the Oxford Companion to the American Musical, after its Los Angeles premiere on March 10, The Sound of Music opened in 131 theaters in the United States, including a limited number of roadshow events. After 4 weeks, the film became the #1 box office movie in the country and held that position for 30 out of the next 43 weeks in 1965. The original theatrical release of the film in America lasted 4.5 years. A few months after its United States release, The Sound of Music opened in 261 theaters overseas, the first American movie to be completely dubbed in a foreign language, both dialogue and music. The German, French, Italian, and Spanish versions were completely dubbed. The Japanese version had Japanese dialogue with English songs, and other versions were released with foreign subtitles. The film was a popular success in every country it opened except the 2 countries where the story originated, Austria and Germany. In these countries, the film had to compete with the much-loved Trapp Family, which provided the original inspiration for the Broadway musical, and its sequel, Trapp Family in America, both films still widely popular in German-speaking Europe and considered the authoritative Von Trapp story. Austrians took exception to the liberties taken by the filmmakers with regard to the costumes, which did not reflect traditional style, and the replacement of traditional Austrian folk songs with Broadway show tunes. The film's Nazi theme was especially unpopular in Germany, where the Munich branch manager for 20th Century Fox approved the unauthorized cutting of the entire third act of the film. Following the wedding sequence, the scenes showing Salzburg following the Anschluss, Robert Wise and the studio intervened. The original film was restored and the branch manager was fired. The Sound of Music has never been popular in Austria and Germany. Box office. The Sound of Music is one of the most commercially successful films of all time. 4 weeks after its theatrical release, it became the #1 box office movie in the United States from revenue generated by 25 theaters, each screening only 10 roadshow performances per week. It held the #1 position for 30 of the next 43 weeks. and ended up the highest-grossing film of 1965. One contributing factor in the film's early commercial success was the repeat business of many film-goers. In some cities in the United States, the number of tickets sold exceeded the total population. By January 1966, the film had earned $20 million in distributor rentals, from just 140 roadshow engagements in the United States and Canada. Overseas, The Sound of Music broke previous box office records in 29 countries, including the United Kingdom, where the film earned £4 million in rentals and grossed £6 million, more than twice as much as any other film had ever taken in. By November 1966, The Sound of Music had become the highest-grossing film of all time, surpassing Gone with the Wind, which held that distinction for 24 years. In November 1969, The Sound of Music completed its initial 4.5-year theatrical release run in the United States, having earned $68,313,000 in North American rentals and $44,168,000 in foreign rentals, for a worldwide total of $112,481,000 in gross returns. It was the first film to gross over $100 million. The film was re-released in 1973 and increased its North American rentals to $78.4 million. By the end of the 1970s, it was ranked 7th in all-time North American rentals, having earned $79 million. The film's re-release in 1990 increased the total North American admissions to 142,415,400, the third highest number of tickets sold behind Gone with the Wind and Star Wars, and about 283.3 million admissions worldwide. The Sound of Music eventually earned a total domestic gross of $163,214,076. and a total worldwide gross of $286,214,076. Adjusted for inflation, the film earned about $2.366 billion at 2014 prices, the fifth highest-grossing film of all time. Historical accuracy. The Sound of Music film, like the stage musical, presents a history of the Von Trapp family that is not completely accurate. The filmmakers use artistic license to convey the essence and meaning of their story. Georg Ludwig von Trapp was indeed an anti-Nazi opposed to the Anschluss and lived with his family in a villa in a district of Salzburg called Haydn. Their lifestyle depicted in the film, however, greatly exaggerated their standard of living. The actual family villa, located at Traunstrasse 34 Haydn 5026, was large and comfortable, but not nearly as grand as the mansion depicted in the film. The house was also not their ancestral home as depicted in the film. The family had previously lived in homes in Zell am See and Klosterneuburg after being forced to abandon their actual ancestral home in Pola following World War I. Georg moved the family to the Salzburg villa shortly after the death of his first wife in 1922. In the film, Georg is referred to as Baron, but his actual family title was Ritter, a hereditary knighthood, the equivalent of which in the United Kingdom is a baronetcy. Austrian nobility, moreover, was legally abolished in 1919, and the nobiliary particle von was prescribed after World War I, so he was legally Georg Trapp. Both the title and the prepositional nobiliary particle von, however, continued to be widely used unofficially as a matter of courtesy. Georg was offered a position in the Kriegsmarine, but this occurred before the Anschluss. He was heavily recruited by the Nazis because he had extensive experience with submarines, and Germany was looking to expand its fleet of U-boats. With his family in desperate financial straits and having no other marketable skills other than his training as a naval officer, he seriously considered the offer before deciding he could not serve a Nazi regime. Rather than threaten arrest, the Nazis actually continued to woo him. In the film, Georg is depicted initially as a humorless, emotionally distant father. In reality, third child Maria von Trapp described her father as a doting parent who made handmade gifts for the children in his woodshop and who would often lead family musicals on his violin. She has a different recollection of her stepmother, whom she described as moody and prone to outbursts of rage. In a 2003 interview, Maria remembered, "She had a terrible temper, and from one moment to the next you didn't know what hit her. We were not used to this, but we took it like a thunderstorm that would pass, because the next minute she could be very nice." Maria Augusta Kuchera had indeed been a novice at Nonnberg Abbey in Salzburg and had been hired by the von Trapp family. However, she was hired only to be a tutor to young Maria Franziska, who had come down with scarlet fever and needed her lessons at home, not to be a governess for all of the children. Maria and Georg married for practical reasons rather than love and affection for each other. Georg needed a mother for his children and Maria needed the security of a husband and family once she decided to leave the abbey. "I really and truly was not in love," Maria wrote in her memoir. "I liked him but didn't love him. However, I loved the children. So in a way I really married the children." They were married in 1927, not in 1938 as depicted in the film, and the couple had been married for over a decade by the time of the Anschluss and had 2 of their 3 children together by that time. Maria later acknowledged that she grew to love Georg over time and enjoyed a happy marriage. The von Trapp family lost most of its wealth during the worldwide depression of the early 1930s. When the Austrian National Bank folded. In order to survive, the family dismissed the servants and began taking in boarders. They also started singing on stage to earn money, a fact that caused the proud Georg much embarrassment. In the film, the von Trapp family hike over the Alps from Austria to Switzerland to escape the Nazis, which would not have been possible. Salzburg is over 200 miles from Switzerland. The von Trapp villa, however, was only a few kilometers from the Austria-Germany border, and the final scene shows the family hiking on the Obersalzberg near the German town of Berchtesgaden within sight of Adolf Hitler's Kehlsteinhaus Eagle's Nest retreat. In reality, the family simply walked to the local train station and boarded a train to Italy. Although Georg was an ethnic German-Austrian, he was also an Italian citizen, having been born in the Dalmatian city of Zadar, which, at that time, was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and later fell into Italian territory after World War I. From Italy they traveled to London, and ultimately the United States. The character Max Detweiler, the scheming family music director, is fictional. The von Trapp's family priest, the Reverend Franz Wosner, was their musical director for over 20 years and accompanied them when they left Austria. The character of Friedrich was based on Rupert, the oldest of the real von Trapp children. Liesel was based on Agathe von Trapp, the second oldest in the real family. The names and ages of the children were changed in part because the third child was also named Maria, and producers thought that it would be confusing to have 2 characters called Maria in the film. The von Trapp family had no control over how they were depicted in the film and stage musical, having given up the rights to their story to a German producer in the 1950s, who then sold the rights to American producers. Robert Wise met with Maria von Trapp and made it clear, according to a memo to Richard Zanuck, that he was not making a documentary, a realistic movie about her family. and that he would make the film with complete dramatic freedom in order to produce a fine and moving film, one they could all be proud of. Soundtrack. The soundtrack to The Sound of Music was written by Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II, and arranged and conducted by Erwin Kostel, who also adapted the instrumental underscore passages. The soundtrack album was released on the RCA Victor label in 1965, and reached the number 1 position on the Billboard 200 that year in the United States. It remained in the top 10 from May 1, 1965 to July 16, 1966. The album has been reissued several times, including a 30th anniversary edition in 1995, a 35th anniversary edition in 2000, a 40th anniversary edition in 2005, and 45th anniversary edition, which reached the number 1 position on the Billboard 200 in 2010, and again in 2013. A 50th anniversary edition was released in 2015, which reached the number 5 position on the Top Soundtracks chart. The Sound of Music soundtrack album was the biggest-selling album in the United Kingdom in 1965, 1966 and 1968, and the second biggest-selling of the entire decade, spending a total of 70 weeks at number 1 on the UK album charts. The Sound of Music also stayed 73 weeks on the Norwegian charts, becoming the 7th best charting album of all time in that country. Legacy. In 1966, American Express created the first Sound of Music guided tour in Salzburg. Since 1972, Panorama Tours has been the leading Sound of Music bus tour company in the city, taking approximately 50,000 tourists a year to various film locations in Salzburg and the surrounding region. Sing-along Sound of Music revival screenings began in London in 1999, leading to a successful run at the Prince Charles Cinema, which is ongoing as of 2016. During the screenings, audience members are often dressed as nuns and von Trapp children, and are encouraged to sing along to lyrics superimposed on the screen. In July 2000, sing-along Sound of Music shows opened in Boston and Austin, Texas. Some audience members dressed up as cast members and interacted with the action shown on the screen. The film began a successful run at the Ziegfeld Theatre in New York City in September 2000, with the opening attended by cast members Charmian Carr, Daniel Truhitt and Kim Karat. Sing-along Sound of Music screenings have since become an international phenomenon. In 2001, the United States Library of Congress selected the film for preservation in the National Film Registry, finding it culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. The Academy Film Archive preserved The Sound of Music in 2003. Television and home media. The first American television transmission of The Sound of Music was on February 29, 1976 on ABC, which paid $15 million for a one-time-only broadcast that became one of the top-rated films ever shown on television. To that point, the movie was not shown again until NBC acquired the broadcast rights and telecast the film on February 11, 1979. NBC continued to air the film annually for 20 years. During most of its run on NBC, the film was heavily edited to fit a 3-hour time slot, approximately 140 minutes without commercials. The 30 minutes edited out of the original film included portions of the morning hymn, an Alleluia sung by the nuns, part of the dialogue between Mother Abbess and Maria in the Abbey, part of Liesel and Rolf's dialogue preceding 16 going on 17, Liesel's verse of Edelweiss sung with the captain and Baroness waltzing at the party, and minor dialogue cuts within existing scenes. The film aired in its uncut form on April 9, 1995. On NBC, Julie Andrews hosted the 4-hour telecast which presented the musical numbers in a letterbox format. As the film's home video availability cut into its television ratings, NBC let their contract lapse in 2001. That year the film was broadcast one time on the Fox network, in its heavily edited 140-minute version. Since 2002 the film has aired on ABC generally during Christmas week and has been broadcast on its sister cable network ABC Family periodically around Easter and other holidays. Most of its more recent runs have been the full version in a 4-hour time slot complete with the in tracks. ABC first broadcast a high-definition version on December 28, 2008. On December 22, 2013, the annual broadcast had its highest ratings since 2007. The increase in ratings were credited to NBC's broadcast of The Sound of Music Live, a live television adaptation of the original musical, which aired earlier that month. In the United Kingdom, the film was first screened by the BBC on 25 December 1978 and as of December 2016 15 times since, mostly around Christmas time. As the BBC is not funded by advertising, there was no need to cut scenes to fit within a time slot, and the film was screened in the full 174-minute version without breaks. The film has been released on VHS, Laserdisc and DVD numerous times. The first DVD version was released on August 29, 2000. To commemorate the 35th anniversary of the film's release, the film is often included in box sets with other Rodgers documentaries and special features. Was released on November 15, 2005. The film made its debut issue on Blu-ray disc on November 2, 2010 for its 45th anniversary. For the Blu-ray release, the original 70mm negatives were rescanned at 8K resolution, then restored and remastered at 4K resolution for the transfer to Blu-ray, giving the most detailed copy of the film seen thus far. On March 10, 2015, Fox Home Entertainment released The Sound of Music 50th Anniversary Ultimate Collector's Edition, a 5-disc set featuring 13 hours of bonus features including a new documentary, The Sound of a City. Julie Andrews returns to Salzburg, a March 2015 episode of ABC's 2020 entitled The Untold Story of the Sound of Music featured a preview of the documentary and interviews by Diane Sawyer. Brought to you by WikiVidi.com. Would you like to know more?